Okay, I would say that we should start now with the seminar. I would like to first of all thank you for saying thanks for attending this seminar and welcome you all. I would like to start by introducing our institute. The IANIGLA is the Argentinian Institute of Ice, Snow, and Environmental Sciences. The institute was born more than 50 years ago, essentially as a ice and snow research institute, but over the years it subsequently incorporated different disciplines, including, of course, biological and social sciences. And we have an annual series of seminar. This is the third seminar of this year. And it's a rarity among seminars because we normally, seminars are normally held in person at our institute and then recorded and uploaded to the institute YouTube channel. But since the nature of this seminar and because Bob and Tom are not in Argentina, we decided to go on as a pre-recorded seminar. We'll have two parts, two pre-recorded seminars by Bob and Tom, and then we'll have a live Q&A session towards the end of the seminar. So the title of today's seminar is 100-Year Riddle on Mount Everest and the Mathematician's Approach to Solve Mountaineering's Greatest Mystery. Did George Mallory and Sandy Irvine reach the summit in 1924? Well, maybe many of you will know that the first confirmed ascent of Mount Everest took place in 1953 by a British expedition. But the British had actually launched no less than 7 previous expeditions in the 1920s and in the 1930s, none of which were successful, at least that we know of. So in the first part of the first pre-recorded video will feature Thom Pollard. Tom has been to Everest several times, including 2 search expeditions. Spoiler alert, one of those that turned to be successful in locating one of the climbers' bodies in 1999. So I will now introduce Tom in his own words. Tom will introduce the early British expeditions to Everest, and especially the 1924 expedition, the geography involved, and of course the characters that are involved in this mystery. So Thom Pollard is an award-winning filmmaker, director of photography, and adventurer whose work has taken him from Easter Island to the summit of Mount Everest. His cinematography has earned numerous accolades, including a PBS, a BAFTA finalist nomination, and a Silver Telly Award for Nature Documentary. His photography has been featured in National Geographic magazine and dozens of publications worldwide. He has filmed 4 documentaries on Mount Everest, 2 in Nepal, 2 in Tibet and China, including the 1999 PBS BBC documentary that chronicles the discovery of George Mallory 75 years after he disappeared. Tom is also the creator of the YouTube channel Everest Mystery, where he explores the history, the legends, and unsolved mysteries of the world's highest peak. A captivating public and speaker, he brings his adventures to life through stunning visuals and compelling storytelling. Tom is currently writing a memoir to be published next year. Now, there are tons of books that have been written and published surrounding this story about Everest and George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, and trying to solve the question of whether they made it to the summit or not. But one of the most recent and unique books, if you will, was published by Robert Bob Edwards, one of our guests and speaker today. Bob is a mathematician, private pilot, actor, writer, and illustrator. He earned his bachelor in mathematics at Cambridge University, England, and his master and PhD at the London School of Economics. Bob is not a professional mountaineer and has never set foot on Mount Everest. He has corresponded with Everest veterans, including members of the 1999 Mallory and Irvine search expedition. He has seen at first hand Mallory's boots at the Royal Geographical Society and the 1933 ice axe at the Alpine Club in London. He's the author of the book Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, The Last Step But One. Bob has taken an analytical and quantitative approach to the central element of the mystery. He likes to make a distinction between what we know and what we think we know. In the case of Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, Bob has taken the central mystery to be whether on June 8, 1924, Mallory or Irvine was the first human to stand at the highest point in the world. So in order not to extend this introduction further, I'd like Marcela to launch the first video by Thom Pollard.
Greetings to you all, and thank you for having me here today, Daniel. It's an honor to be invited to speak about one of the things that I am most passionate about, the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. And also, I wanted to extend my thanks to Bob Edwards, who is a real mind, a real thinker, somebody who's really getting to the depth of some of the clues that we have. I'm more a creative type and was brought into the mystery of the disappearance of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine 25 years ago when I was asked to be the high-altitude cameraman for a BBC public broadcasting in the United States co-production that was to search for the remains of Mallory and Irvine. Ultimately, the remains of George Mallory were discovered, and I had the opportunity to be at the site and actually look into the face of George Mallory. There's not a ton of time, and I have a ton of slides, so what I endeavor to do in this presentation is to provide you with a very general overview and let the real brains of the operation, Bob Edwards, go in with his scalpel and cut deeper into some of the clues. But let me try to present them here to you today, and hopefully when I'm through and we hand the baton to Bob, you'll have a general understanding of some of the main clues, some of the things we know, and some of the things we certainly do not know. So let's get right to it. The Great Everest Mystery, Mallory and Irvine. I have been wondering about their disappearance since 1999. I learned at the time almost everything that I needed to learn about the expedition right as I was preparing for it. I didn't know much about the early expeditions to Everest. I was more of a fan of Reinhold Messner and Chris Bonington and Doug Scott, and learned that in the early 1920s, this being a photograph of the 1924 expedition to Mount Everest, this was their third expedition in 4 years to attempt to get to the top. In the back left is Sandy Irvine, and to his left is George Mallory with his foot on the shoulder of the gentleman in front of him, who does play a big role in it, but I don't want too many names in there. Ultimately, our goal was to look for Mallory and Irvine up on the great vast north face, which was the same objectives ultimately that they had back in 1924. Scientists said that if you went up into the death zone, which it wasn't even called the death zone back then, you'll die. You cannot survive. Human beings cannot survive at such great altitudes. The body begins deteriorating. So these men were certainly courageous and were willing to risk it all, having just emerged from World War I, where they faced death in the eye many, many times. And it was on June 8th of 1924 that George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, as you can see here, this is the last known photograph taken of these two gentlemen. This is at the North Col, so they still had a ways to go up. Let me zoom in a little bit on that. That's George Mallory on the left and Sandy Irvine on the right. And Irvine, you can very prominently see the oxygen apparatus affixed to his back, and Sandy was a real fix-it kind of guy, an engineering mind who knew how to tinker with all the mechanics of this oxygen, which was a newfangled way to endeavor to get to higher and higher altitudes. And so that was Mallory's chosen climbing partner, although he was quite young and he also was quite inexperienced for the most part as a climber. On June 8th in 1924, they set out early in the morning, at least we believe they set out early in the morning, and they were last seen at over 28,000 feet. And you can excuse me for not having the metric system dialed in, but they were less than 300 or 400 meters from the summit of Mount Everest when clouds rolled in, and the last sight of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine was of them heading toward the top. And that was the last that was ever seen of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. Fast forward 75 years later, I was called by a producer at public broadcasting in the United States, and she asked me if I would like to be the high altitude cameraman for the expedition to go look for Mallory and Irvine. And I immediately went out and did a crash course on who are these Mallory and Irvine guys. And when I realized who they were, I was absolutely magnificently blown completely away at their bravery and courage. And so I absolutely accepted the wonderful invitation. I quit my job, and shortly thereafter, there I was in the middle of some of the most incredible mountaineers that I have ever met, and they still are good friends of mine today. This is us below the North Col at Advanced Base Camp. This is the 1999 Mallory and Irvine Research Expedition. This was a research manual that was put together by Jochen Hemleb, a German researcher, one of the, if you will, one of the great minds, one of the thinkers of the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. He's the guy who would think about all the clues. And inside this 8-page manual had literal GPS coordinates where we were supposed to go and search for Mallory and or Irvine on the north face. And he set about a whole plan, and which we undertook. And by the 1st of May, we were one of the first teams up the mountain. The only other team that was there working on the mountain were the Ukrainians, and made our way up the mountain. You can see these absolutely stunning photographs. This is Jake Norton, one of the great climbers of our era, who has done more searching with boots on the ground than any person ever in the history since Mallory and Irvine had disappeared. And this was his first expedition to look for him. Up we went. This, you can see the team headed toward Camp 5. The summit is not that far in the distance. And this is the area essentially in the general vicinity of Mallory's remains, which were ultimately discovered on May 1st. Conrad Anker was the person who not necessarily chanced upon him, but ventured slightly outside the search area set forth by Jochen Hemleb. He came upon the remains. I was not there that day. I returned with Andy Politz 15 days later, and on May 16th, Andy Politz and I returned. As I showed you this picture, you can see the metal detector sticking out of Andy's backpack. We returned after an extended stay in base camp, observing the face and the snowfall taking place. And on the 16th, we were back at the remains of George Mallory with the intent of looking for the camera. He was known to, or believed to have been carrying, a Kodak vest pocket camera. We wanted to find that camera with the idea that if he did make it to the summit, he would have indeed taken a photograph. Well, if he made it to the summit in daylight, of course. And so Andy and I set about in going extensively through the area, searching all the area around Mallory, beside him. I'm about to show you a photograph that might leave a couple of people a little squirmish, so I wanted to prepare you for it. We observed his remains. One of the things I noticed was that his toes were not frostbitten, and I was actually quite shocked at this. I thought for sure with these leather boots that he was wearing, this is the bottom of his hobnail boot, a photograph that I took while it was still on his foot. I thought, wow, I was amazed that his toes were not even remotely frostbitten. However, his hands very much were frostbitten, and he did not have any gloves on. His hands were bare. I won't show you a picture of that for some who will be disappointed, but we did find some of the things that were on his remains or in the pockets of his sports jacket, which is really what it was, his goggles. There's his boot that Andy Politz found. You can see some socks in the background. And the other things that over the years, although this was found in 1999, back in 1933, Percy Wynne Harris on the next British Everest expedition found Sandy Irvine's. We believe that it's Sandy Irvine's. Bob Edwards might have a bone to pick with me about that, but I have always believed it to be Sandy Irvine's ice axe way up upon the mountain. You can see this is a schematic right here. You can see kind of in the top middle, that red line pointing down. That ice axe was found just below the ridge. And whether it was Irvine's or Mallory's ice axe is almost unimportant, because if you were to look at that more hockey stick shaped line down a little bit lower, you can see where the remains of Mallory were found. And it's not quite, but very much almost in a straight line below where the ice axe was found. So these are a couple of the clues. That was one of the ones that we knew about, that Jochen set us forth upon. Now this discovery by Conrad and by our team was world news. It swept around the world. It was on the cover of the New York Times. Suddenly Conrad Anker was thrust into the spotlight, made the cover of many magazines. This is a picture of that Jake Norton took that made it on the cover of Outside. I sold probably a half a dozen photographs to National Geographic, and we were really, our lives were changed absolutely overnight. This was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, actually spending time beside George Mallory in deep and utter reverence and respect for this incredible man who I had such respect for. Interestingly, I had the opportunity to spend an evening with his son, John Mallory, who was just like 7 years old when his dad died, and had a dinner with him that included David Brashears and Tom Holzell, and then did an interview with him the following day with David Brashears. So getting to know him a little bit really brought the weight of the loss of a human being full circle to me, and it wasn't lost on me just how the magnitude of a death in the mountain, how great it is on the survivors who are at home. And that was not lost on me, even in one iota, having left home myself for this expedition, leaving a job behind and returning home to my son, who actually forgot who I was when I returned home. He was only about 16 or 17 months old when I got home. And this is the moment, a photograph that my mom took, that he was like, "Oh yeah, Dad, it's that cool guy who plays with me all the time." And So this one, if you get me going, will bring me to tears. It's, to me, one of the sweetest photographs ever taken in my life. But it brought me very close to the weight of the loss of Mallory and Sandy Irvine, who was a very great force in my life in the years following, up until I got to meet his great niece, Julie Summers. So fast forward 20 years, I was speaking with a very good friend of mine, an author, Mark Sinnott. He's an adventurer. He lives very close to where I live. And we were having a conversation after he saw a public presentation I did about the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. He goes, do you think that you might actually be able to find Sandy Irvine? You said so in the presentation. I said, yeah, and I'll tell you how. There's this guy, and he knew who he was, Tom Holzell, the historian who coined the term, the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. And Holzell said, I know where Sandy Irvine is. Why don't you come visit my house and I'll show you exactly where his body is on a map. And so Mark and I got into our cars. This is in 2018. Drove to Connecticut to go see him, and here's Holzell wowing Sinnott with stories about the camera. This is an identical vest pocket camera that Mallory is known to have been carrying. And so Tom Holzell blew up this aerial satellite type photograph looking down on the ridge, and he was pointing out to Mark here, this is where he is. This is an inconsistency in the photograph that shows something oblong, shaped differently, and he considered that to be the spot where Sandy Irvine may have laid down to die. And he showed us specifically on the map, this is the standard route. You can see on the top, you can see where the ice axe was in relation to the first step. And then the lower route is where we are known to believe that Mallory and Irvine were making their descent. And so Holzell said, if you go right there, you're going to find where Sandy Irvine is. And when he was talking to us, I was filming Mark, and I caught this face on Mark that when I saw that look in an adventurer's eyes, I knew that the expedition was on, and it was starting out. It was going to be just me and Mark. We both sent $30,000. That was literally every penny, to by name, to the CTMA, the Chinese Tibet Mountaineering Association. And then soon National Geographic signed on, and they said, hey, we'll support a team to go look for Mallory and Irvine, or Irvine's remains, up the face. And so there we are with a small team, Renan Ozturk in the middle, Jim Hurst on the left back, Matt Irving, that's me in the middle bottom, and Jamie McGinnis on the bottom right, one of the great Everest climbers of our era, Mark on the top right. We went with a lot of ideas of where to look on the face and how to hone in on, as we called it, Holzell's slot. But instead of putting our own bodies in danger, we went there with this newfangled thing called drone technology. And we had several drones with us, Renan Ozturk being an amazing drone flight operator. Matt Irving and I both knew how to fly drones, Matt much better than I. And we flew several missions from here at ABC. This drone, we could take off with that drone, literally fly almost all the way up to the summit, stopping just short of where the winds would have carried it over to the east or Kangshung side of the face, and all the way back down before the batteries died. And we came home with magnificent drone shots that are today not really publicly out there, but these drone shots, what we did, we took these images that you can zoom in on a great magnification power, and spent days down in a village before we went back up the mountain, pouring through it, looking for signs of Sandy Irvine. And I looked for literally 2 days to try to re-find the body of George Mallory, and was absolutely unable to. It was shocking to me that I couldn't find his body anywhere in these incredible drone shots that we took back. There's dozens and dozens. We have flight footage of these. So as it would turn out, I had a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, a minor potential stroke. I don't believe that it was. I went down the mountain as my brethren went back up for a summit bid with the Sherpa team, and on the way down, Mark Sinnott was going to head off the route and endeavor to find the ever infamous Holzell's slot. These incredible photographs taken on a brilliant summit day. Believe it or not, every single team on the mountain was gone. We were the only team on the entire mountain, not only up to the summit, all the way down to base camp, north or south. And we had the mountain virtually to ourselves. They went up, up, and up on a gorgeous day, summiting. Here's a couple of the Sherpa team summiting. Beautiful views over to Makalu. There's Renan on the summit to the left, Mark seated on the summit to the right. Incredible stuff. And so what we did was, the plan was Mark was going to go down on the way down and go off the fixed ropes and search on the face for Holzell's slot. Mark was much to the chagrin of Lakpa Sherpa, our friend of the expedition, who, rest in peace, he lost his life on Makalu a year ago. Mark went down and was unable to find the location of Sandy Irvine. He went to the slot and he determined that absolutely Sandy Irvine was not where Tom Holzell told us it would be, leading us to the conclusion that Sandy Irvine had been removed from the mountain. And we went back down to, at the end of the expedition, on our way out, and had a series of conversations with liaison officers and high-ranking officials in the CTMA who assured us, they wanted their anonymity kept, they assured us that Irvine's remains had been removed from the mountain. And Jamie asked, when? Was it 2008 when you closed the mountain for the Beijing Olympics? And they're like, no, way before that. Now, these are things that we had rumblings of in the lead up to the expedition. Had we learned what we learned after the expedition about the body being removed? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, the expedition funding from National Geographic would have been cut. We wouldn't have gone. Maybe we would have gone to Lhasa and done some searching up the Rongbuk Glacier, which is something Mark Sinnott and I talked about on countless occasions, to go search there for the remains that theoretically would have landed there had Sandy Irvine's remains been, if you will, given to the mountain, as they said the word thrown, but it's because of the translation from Chinese to English. And then in late September, early October, a team from National Geographic on a completely unrelated project discovered just the boot and foot of Sandy Irvine 100 years after the disappearance on the central Rongbuk Glacier. That boot was left with the CTMA and is in China, where DNA testing will be matched with two family members, two women from the Irvine family, to absolutely determine whether it was or was not Sandy Irvine. So our earlier inklings and understanding that the body had been either surrendered or pushed down the mountain or removed from the mountain were indeed confirmed. There will more than likely be successive searches for Sandy's additional remains in the Rongbuk Glacier probably quite soon. So there we have it, the great mystery of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine's disappearance on Mount Everest in 1924. Bob Edwards will be able to go in it with a fine-tooth comb. The question remains, did they make it to the summit or not? And I thank you for having me here today, and hopefully you will become sleuths yourselves and help us solve what I believe is certainly the greatest mystery in mountaineering history. Thank you. Peace be with you all.
Well, I hope you have enjoyed the first presentation by Tom. Before we go on, I'd kindly ask you to turn off your microphones because we have a slight hosting problem, and we cannot mute all of the microphones ourselves. So I kindly ask you to do it before we proceed.
Hello, I'm Bob Edwards. I'm the author of Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, The Last Step at One, published by Pen and Sword in 2024. The subject of this presentation is the last climb of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine on June 8, 1924, on the north face of Mount Everest. I am a mathematician and not a mountaineer, so my approach in this book and in this presentation is necessarily analytical and quantitative, and is based primarily on contemporary accounts. To my mind, in the story of Mallory and Irvine, the central mystery is whether one of them, on June the 8th, 1924, was the first person to stand at the highest point in the world. At the time, since they did not return, there was no way to know for sure. Some of their colleagues thought they had done so, others thought not. In the years that followed, there developed something of an official narrative to the effect that they had failed. But if they reached the summit of Everest, they did so 29 years before the ascent by Hillary and Tenzing. My presentation is in 4 parts. The first is what we know, by which I mean our knowledge based on contemporary accounts, setting aside modern opinion, speculation, and hearsay. The second is what we do not know, in which I will be brief since there are too many unknowns to address in this presentation. The third is Hypotheses of the climb, in which I will again briefly outline some of the hypotheses that I presented in my book and for which I think there is substantive evidence. The fourth is Irvine's journey, in which I relate my ideas as to when and where Irvine's remains fell to the glacier. Here I make a disclaimer that this is a work in progress. In this narration, in order to save time, I will generally use imperial units, which are the units used in most of the source documents. The images include the equivalent metric units. The first part, then, is what we know, in terms of facts, data, and documentation. Here, as I mentioned earlier, I have relied primarily on contemporary accounts. These include the official account of the 1924 expedition, authored primarily by Colonel Edward Norton, the personal accounts of some of the expedition members, notably John Noel and Noel Odell, the film The Epic of Everest, shot and narrated by John Noel, and the letters and diaries of Mallory and Irvine, by courtesy respectively of Magdalen College, Cambridge, and Merton College, Oxford. We know from Odell's famous photograph that Mallory and Irvine left Camp 4 at 23,000 feet on the North Col on the morning of June 6, 1924. We can see that they personally carried at least one oxygen bottle each. They may have carried more. They were accompanied by 12 porters, some of whom carried oxygen, The number of bottles is unknown. It was an easy climb to Camp 5 at 25,300 feet. Odell's photograph is often represented as the last image of Mallory and Irvine alive. It is not. On June 7th, at an unknown time, John Noel captured them on film, accompanied by at least 2 porters. They were ascending above Camp 5 on the North Ridge. Noel was on another mountain several miles away, namely Changzi. From his vantage point, the climbing party was silhouetted against a bank of cloud. After that, as far as we know, he never saw them again. We know that Mallory sent 2 notes from his high camp, one for John Noel and one for Noel Odell. My takeaways are as follows. Mallory planned on an early start on June 8th, but we do not know what he meant by early. Mallory expected that Noel would be able to see him by telephoto at 8 a.m., although bizarrely he wrote 8 p.m. Mallory expected to be at that hour on or just below the summit pyramid. Mallory wanted Odell to leave Camp 5 vacant on June 8th, so he did not plan to stay at Camp 6 on the return. We know that Odell on June the 8th at 12:50 saw, or believed he saw, Mallory and Irvine briefly through a clearing in the clouds. His first descriptions referred to their surmounting a rock step on the ridge. In one of these descriptions he referred to the place as the last step but one. In October 1925, he collaborated with an artist for the Sphere magazine. The artist's impression showed Odell holding binoculars. The artist's impression depicts the place as similar to the third step, which at that time had no name. Over time, Odell qualified his early descriptions and privately referred to the place as the second step. Sometime in the 1980s, Odell drew a map of his climbs of those 2 days. The map is not consistent with the times that he reported in June 1924. We know that in 1933, Percy Wynne Harris found an ice axe on the north face, on smooth slabs inclined at about 30 degrees. The altitude was about 27,700 feet. Only Mallory or Irvine could have dropped or placed the axe there. The axe has various notches or cuts. In his memoirs in the 1980s, Sir Percy wrote that his own porter had made those marks. I believe, given the smooth and steep slabs where the axe was found, that it was placed and not dropped there. I saw the axe at the Alpine Club in London. It is 37.5 inches long. At Shrewsbury School in England, there is an ice axe which belonged to Irvine. It is 43.5 inches long. I believe the axe from 1933 was originally issued to a porter and was not a personal axe of either Mallory or Irvine. We know that on May 17th, 1999, Tapley Richards found an oxygen cylinder bearing the number 9 near the first step. Only Mallory or Irvine could have placed it there. On Mallory's body, an envelope was found bearing a list apparently of 6 oxygen cylinders. One of them appeared to be number 9. Later, Jake Norton reported that the cylinder had contained oxygen. The quantity was never determined. The present location of the bottle is unknown. To this day, we do not know whether the cylinder was placed during an ascent, a descent, or even as part of a caching prior to the climb. We know that on May 1st, 1999, Conrad Anker found Mallory's body. Mallory was about 1,200 yards from the summit and over 2,000 feet below. Mallory's leg was broken, and he had a deep wound above his right eye. His gloves and mittens were missing. Both his hands were frostbitten. His goggles were in a pocket, so he had died after sunset. There was no sign of oxygen apparatus, an ice axe, a torch, or a lantern. His altimeter was broken. His watch, found later, had run down. In short, the discovery told nothing about when he had died. Mallory had a rope around his body and discolorations on his torso. The climbers cut the rope. It remains unknown whether Mallory had been roped to Irvine or even accompanied by Irvine when he died. We know that in September 2024, Eric Rupke found a boot on the central Rongbuk Glacier. The head of the glacier is at about 21,000 feet, that is, about 7,000 feet below where Mallory and Irvine were last seen alive. The boot contained a sock with the label AC Irvine and a human foot. The team handed over the findings to the China-Tibet Mountaineering Association. Nothing more has been disclosed about the place of discovery, the condition of the findings, or what the Chinese authorities plan to do with them. From the single published image, we can see that the discovery was in a narrow canyon with a floor of moraine, bounded on both sides by ice walls. At one end of the canyon there is blue sky. At the other end there is a series of ridges, but no sign of Everest or any identifiable mountain. 12. The second section of my presentation, which will be extremely brief, is what we do not know. As Don Juan Matus said to Carlos Castaneda, if what we know is the island of the Tonal, what we do not know is the Nagual, which is essentially everything else. In this presentation, we don't have time to cover in any detail what we do not know. So I have attempted to summarize it in one slide as follows. Where was Mallory's and Irvine's high camp? Did Odell know where their high camp was? What time did they leave their camp? What were they carrying? What was their plan? Where was Odell when he saw Mallory and Irvine, and where were they? And how did they get there? What was Mallory's and Irvine's route after Odell's sighting? How did Mallory end up where his body was found? Where on the glacier was Irvine's boot, and how did it get there? What roles did the ice axe and cylinder number 9 play in the story? To do justice to any of these unknowns would, I think, take more time than we have today. The third section of my presentation is a selection of my personal hypotheses relating to Mallory's and Irvine's last climb. These are drawn from my book, Mallory, Irvine, and Everest, The Last Step But One, and here I am presenting some of those which I think are well supported by objective evidence. My first hypothesis relates to Odell's location when he sighted Mallory and Irvine. Odell's early narratives related to climbing a little crag at 26,000 feet. He wrote that it was at the top of this crag that he made the sighting. It was implicit in these narratives that he could see both the first step and the second step, and by implication the third step, which at that time had no name. However, in relation to the timings that he gave, the altitude of 26,000 feet cannot be correct. Long story short, I believe that at the time of his sighting, Odell was at about 26,500 or 26,600 feet. This has consequences for what he could and could not see, to which I will now turn. My second hypothesis relates to what Odell could and could not see. On Google Earth, I identified 3 formations which I thought could be his little crag. I selected Crag A, drew paths from this point to the crests of the first, second, and third steps, and calculated the elevation profiles. I concluded that Odell could have seen the crest of the third step, but not the crests of the first or second steps, which were blocked by intervening terrain. My analysis echoed the doubts that Odell himself had expressed. I therefore advanced the hypothesis that Odell saw Mallory and Irvine climbing and surmounting the third step. My third hypothesis relates to Mallory's and Irvine's route. The hypothesis is necessarily based on circumstantial evidence drawn from Mallory's own statements. Mallory's statements convey that he did not contemplate a route along the crest of the northeast ridge, that he envisaged a fast assault on the summit, and that he would not waste time attempting difficult or extreme terrain. In fact, the word step does not appear once in all of his writings. I therefore advance the hypothesis that Mallory did not intend to climb and did not climb the second step. He and Irvine arrived at the third step by another route. I have a hypothesis for that route, which I can present on another occasion. My last hypothesis for today concerns the fate of Andrew Irvine. There have been several sightings of deceased European climbers who might be Irvine. Of these, I believe that the most credible and the most authoritative is that of Wang Fuzhou. On May 24, 1960, Wang was a member of the Chinese team that was tasked to reach the summit. It is documented that, at a minimum, they reached the third step. In 1965, Wang told a Soviet audience that at 8,600 meters he had seen the body of a European. The deceased climber was wearing suspenders, or braces. That climber could not be Mallory. The only remaining possibilities are that it was Irvine, who was once photographed wearing suspenders, or if not Irvine, a member of a Soviet expedition of 1952, on which only press reports exist. The second part of this hypothesis is that if Irvine was indeed sighted by Wang Fuzhou, his body subsequently fell to the central Rongbuk Glacier, that is, after 1960. Again, the evidence is necessarily circumstantial. Since 1960, hundreds of climbers have traversed between the second step and the third step. None ever reported sighting the body of a pre-war climber. If we accept Wang's account of a sighting at 8,600 meters, that location is above the top of the Norton Couloir, and from there it is an uninterrupted trajectory to the head of the glacier. In 2024, somewhere on the glacier, at an unknown distance from the mountain, Irvine's boot and his partial remains were found. The fourth and last part of my presentation relates to Irvine's journey on the glacier. Here I must make the disclaimer that I am not a glaciologist. In the few months since the report of the discovery, I have endeavored to familiarize myself with the academic literature on the long-term movements of glaciers in the immediate area of Mount Everest. Absent any disclosure from National Geographic, our assumptions on these movements are critical to an understanding of where the discovery was made, and thereby of when Irvine's body or remains fell to the glacier. Firstly, I attempted to narrow down the location of the discovery. In this respect, I had three sources. The first was the single photograph published in National Geographic magazine, in particular the reflected image in the team leader's sunglasses. The second was correspondence with veterans of Everest expeditions who kindly shared their subjective views on where the published photo had been taken. The third was applications such as Peak Finder and Peak Visor, which reproduced the view from any specified location in any specified direction. Long story short, my best estimate is that the discovery was made on the medial moraine of the glacier, about 6,500 meters from the head of the glacier and thereby from the foot of the northern couloir. Next, I attempted to reverse engineer a trajectory from Mount Everest that was consistent with the presumed location of the discovery. Here, the National Geographic team had thrown a curveball to the effect that the discovery had been preceded and somehow inspired by their finding an oxygen cylinder from 1933, which could have no bearing on Irvine's fall. In my understanding, which glaciologists may correct, objects falling to the head of the glacier are likely to be funneled inwards towards the central flow line. So I concluded, for the moment, that the location of Irvine's remains was consistent with either a fall along the northern couloir or one from the Mallory Basin to the east of the couloir. Finally, I attempted a hypothesis about the time period for Irvine's journey. I assembled data from NASA's It's Live portal, which I understand to represent surface ice velocities as measured by satellite images. I selected several points at 1 kilometer intervals from the head of the glacier as far as the discovery point. The data were enormously variable over time within any given year, as well as from year to year, and to a lesser extent, depending on the selected point within the glacier. As a gross simplification, I calculated annual averages for all data points in each year, irrespective of the interval of measurement. Long story short, I found a rather weak but significant correlation between annual average velocities on the glacier and the average summer temperatures at Tingri weather station. I attempted a broad reconstruction of velocities for 1924 to 1986. Given the extreme variability of the data, as far as I could tell, the discovery was consistent either with a fall in 1924 or a fall after 1960. Final disclaimer, I have not yet attempted any modeling of reanalysis data sets. I have not studied these data sets in sufficient depth. I will conclude with my current thoughts regarding the mystery of Mallory and Irvine. If we do not accept Odell's sighting, all bets are off. If we do accept it, it follows that Mallory and Irvine were on the summit pyramid at 12:50 p.m. on June 8, 1924. I have argued that they surmounted the third step. Modern climbers know that from that point there is no substantive obstacle in the way of the summit. On that day, at achievable speeds of ascent and descent, there was enough daylight to reach the summit and to return to their high camp, possibly even to Camp 5. Something went wrong and led to catastrophe. What happened, we do not yet know. A last thought. In 2023, I visited the Royal Geographical Society and viewed the boots that Mallory had been wearing when he died. I have suggested to the Society that on or embedded in the boots, with appropriate imaging technology, they could still find particles of rock. Those particles could tell a story of where Mallory had been before he died. Thank you.
Okay, with Bob's presentation, we now end the pre-recorded videos, and we can switch to the live Q&A session. For some reason, Tom hasn't joined so far, so I think, Bob, you are left alone to answer the
Happy to do it,
questions.
Danielle. Far away.
Great. So I invite the audience to either turn on their videos and audios, or raise their hands before they post a question. So there is a first question by Sue. Bob, I really appreciate your thoughts. Given the rope injuries seen on Mallory's body, it has been assumed that he and Irvine were roped together when the fall happened. Given where Mallory was found, is it inconsistent, with Irvine's body being seen between the second and third step? You can reread the question, maybe.
I see it. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Sue. I'm not a medical professional, and as far as I know, no medical professional has ever given an opinion, either verbal or in writing, on Mallory's injuries. Just a moment,
Okay, thank you, Bob.
I'm just pulling up English as my language. In brief, Sue, you say it has been assumed, but from my point of view, I'm not able to interpret medical injuries from images. And as I said a moment ago, I believe that there has never been a professional medical opinion expressed on Mallory's injuries. For that reason, I said earlier that I believe we do not know, at least I do not know, whether Mallory and Irvine were roped at the time of Mallory's fall. And indeed, I believe we do not know whether they were together, whether they were accompanying each other at that time or not.
Okay, there's another question from Andrew. Bob, if you can reach out the chat.
Yes, Andrew is asking, what's the source that the watch was wound down? I believe my source, I would have to check my notes, but I believe my source is Thom Pollard. It was certainly Tom who found the watch on May the 16th, 1999. He found it, I think. Tom should be here to confirm this, but if he comes in, no doubt he'll correct me. I believe Tom found the watch in one of the pockets of Mallory's trousers, which had previously been overlooked, and brought the watch back to, I presume, to base camp. And I think subsequently it was found that the watch had run down, could be rewound, and started to function again after winding. Like I say, I think Tom is my source, but I have to ask Tom to confirm that.
John D says Jochen Hemlep has evidence that the watch was almost fully wound.
Okay, I haven't seen that evidence. Does that mean when it was found, or does it mean later? I don't know. I can't answer that question.
Any other question from the audience? So, Bob, what is your opinion on whether we will someday really know for sure about how the climb went and what happened that day? Do you think there is a single clue beyond the camera, which now appears to have been lost, that could solve really the mystery and write the final point?
Well, Daniel, since you raised the camera, I believe that it's an assumption that either Mallory or Irvine even carried a camera. I searched long and hard for evidence that either of them had a camera on that day, and I could find no such evidence. I found much evidence to the effect that there were, as I recall, about 9 cameras available for the use of the climbers. So it was approximately 1 per person. I could not find any evidence that Mallory or Irvine had carried a camera on that climb. I believe this is an assumption which has been repeated so often that it has become a kind of conventional wisdom. But I do not have any documentation that a camera was in their possession. You are asking what was okay. what could possibly happen to solve the mystery? I could think of a number of things. Firstly, the discovery of Irvine's body, which might give us some more information. The condition of his body, any artifacts that might be found on his body, might tell us something. The second, I think, important piece of analysis would be to examine Mallory's boot under, let's say, scanning electron microscopy and determine if there are any particles on the boot which could be attributed to a specific layer, rock layer, stratigraphic layer on Mount Everest. I think that analysis is worth performing. It may or may not yield a definitive result, but if the Royal Geographical Society were willing to do that, I think it's a job worth doing.
Great, thank you, Bob. There is another question in the chat by Andrew.
Was I able to hold the boot in my hand? The society allowed me, if I wished, to hold the boot in my hand, pick it up, do what I wanted with it. And apparently they allow that to any visitor who wishes to see the boot. I did not do so precisely because I did not want to contaminate the boot. So I asked the librarian, the archivist, to simply put it on a table in front of me. And then I looked at it from a distance of, I guess, about 50 centimeters, probably for more than an hour. saying nothing and contemplating.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Are there any, there's a question by Mariana in the chat.
Mariana, glacial flow velocities. Have I considered comparing the flow velocities with other sources? The only source which I have used for velocities is NASA It's Live. These data go back to, I think, the mid-80s, around 1983 or 85. I'm not aware of any other source of data on glacier velocities relating specifically to the Central Wrongbook. I searched long and hard in the academic literature, including Chinese academic literature. I found some very, very fragmentary data pertaining to the East Wrongbook, but I found nothing pertaining to the Central Wrongbook. And I think the Chinese glaciologists, for unknown reasons, have preferred to study the East Wrongbook rather than the Central. So literally, I found almost nothing on the Central Wrongbook beyond the NASA It's Live data.
Great. Thank you, Bob. There's another question by John.
Isn't it most likely that Mallory and Irvine were roped? Well, first of all, John says they both fell together from the ice axe location. Well, firstly, I believe they did not fall. Certainly, Mallory did not fall from the ice axe location. One of the images in the presentation I've just given, which I guess Daniel will probably share later, shows the contour lines on the north face of Mount Everest. The contour lines are not available on Google Earth. You have to go to other applications to find the contour lines. There is a very good one. It's called Contour Map Creator. It's produced by a gentleman named Christoph Hofstetter in Switzerland. And you can import his contour lines into first PowerPoint and then Google Earth. If you place those contour lines on Google Earth, you see very clearly that Mallory could not have fallen from the ice axe location. I'm assuming that a fall of a solid object on an inclined surface must be perpendicular to the contour lines. And Mallory's fall line is, I think, I'd have to check my notes, but I think it's something like 200 meters horizontally to the east of any possible fall line from the ice axe location. So in short, I do not think Mallory fell from the ice axe location. I think, again, this is an assumption which has been made repeatedly over the years and has become conventional wisdom, but is simply not true. A question again from John. Would the drone photos be useful in determining whether there was a camp 6B higher than the known camp 6? Well, John, firstly, let me say that I do believe there was a camp 6B higher than Norton and Somerville's camp 6. I did have a slide in which I wanted to present that hypothesis, but we had to keep within the time for this presentation. I believe that Mallory's and Irvine's camp 6 was at 27,300 feet. That's to say, at least 500 feet above Norton's and Somerville's. And I think they simply stopped at Norton's and Somerville's camp 6 to collect perhaps whatever they wanted from there, or to leave things they didn't want. I have no way of knowing, of course. And that they subsequently made their high camp at the northeast shoulder for which I think a great amount of evidence exists. To answer your question, whether the drone photos would show this or not, I haven't seen any of the drone photos, and I do not know what was the route of the drone. I do not know what course they set for those photos, so I can't answer that question. If they did go over the northeast shoulder, they might possibly show the remains of that camp, but I do not know whether they in fact programmed the drone to that location.
Okay, thank you, Bob, for the answer. So if there are no additional questions from the audience, oh, there's John still still asking.
John asks, since Odell took supplies up to Camp 6, didn't he expect them to return there? I suppose he did. Certainly, Mallory asked Odell to take up a compass. That's the one thing he asked for. The way I read the note is that he wanted the compass to be placed at Camp 5. But I guess reasonable people may disagree and may think it was supposed to be at Camp 6. For me, the fact that Mallory's note said, please leave Camp 5 vacant, suggests to me that he did not intend to go back to Camp 6, that he in fact intended to go from the summit directly to Camp 5 and possibly even to Camp 4. And in some way, I'm digressing a little bit, but I think the location of Mallory's body is consistent with a direct descent in which the intent was to reach Camp 5. If you look at the place where Mallory's body was found, and you allow for a relatively short fall to that location, then to me it does seem that he was on his way to Camp 5 and not to Camp 6.
Thank you, Bob. The time for the seminar is now unfortunately over. It will stop recording in a few minutes. So for those who are still wanting to post questions to Bob, I recommend you to search for several internet blogs on the mystery. There's Jake Norton's blog in which Bob is really active, and that's how I got to know Bob in the first place. So I would therefore say thank you everybody for joining the seminar. And thanks of course to Bob and Tom and to the IT people of IANIGLA Infolab who have done a really great job in assisting us to put this seminar together. So thank you very much to all.
Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, bye-bye to everybody. Hope you enjoyed the
Bye-bye.
seminar.
God bless. Thank you.